Hey kids, I was talking to my daughter the other day and it occurred to me I needed to make this video. What is the chief sinner and why do I call myself the chief sinner? Thank you for asking. Questions are always a great place to start, aren't they? I'm borrowing that moniker from Paul, and I always found the scholarly explanation of why a little bit compelling, but first, 1 Timothy 1:15, here is a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. So, what does that mean? Why would Paul, of all people, call himself the worst of all sinners? Well, Paul was originally called Saul of Tarsus. He was a strong persecutor of Christians, even to the point of being a full supporter of the stoning of the first Christian martyr, Stephen. However, Jesus gets a hold of Saul on the road to Damascus there. He recognizes Jesus as Lord and becomes a follower of Christ, adopting the name Paul. The theory as to why he would later call himself the chief of all sinners is that his past, was never far from his mind, but it really was what it was about what was right before him. As evidence of this, we have Paul's writings. Paul wrote about 25% of the New Testament. In Paul's early writings, like in the book of Galatians, we see him, he is asserting his apostolic authority. And whereas he acknowledges past persecution, he rather focuses on his new calling and conversion. It all feels a little defensive. By the time we get to First Corinthians, 7 years has passed, and we see Paul referring to himself as the least of all the apostles. No longer is he asserting his apostolic authority. Now he knows he's an apostle, he just knows he's a bad apostle. About 5 years later, Paul is in prison writing Ephesians, where he refers to himself as the very least of all the saints. Over the span of 10 years, he's gone from being an apostle to being merely the worst of all saints. But even that is not a far enough fall, because he will later refer to himself as the least among the believers. Do you see what's happening to him? And not long after that, he will call all his achievements rubbish in Philippians. So finally, we come to Paul's later writings, where in 1 Timothy, Paul calls himself the worst of all sinners, the chief sinner. You see, this was not a spiritual decline on Paul's behalf. This was a follower of Christ grappling with the fundamental truth of a walk with God. Only a true Christian knows the heights from which they have fallen. So I do not call myself the chief sinner out of exultation or pride. I just realize who I am before the throne of Christ. I am the chief sinner.